Black little boy points at a cop in court. The shocking truth he reveals leaves everyone shocked. The courtroom was electric with tension. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed, and a sea of uniformed officers loomed behind the defense. Outside, protesters roared, "Justice for David Johnson!" Their voices rattled the courthouse walls, demanding an end to corruption. At the defense table, Michael Reeves sat smug, a man who had always walked free behind his badge. His high-powered lawyers exuded confidence, ready to twist the truth. Across the aisle, Maya Johnson sat rigid, fists clenched, eyes burning. Her husband's blood haunted her dreams. Today, justice would be served, or the system would betray her again. Then the moment came. The courtroom doors creaked open, and a bailiff called for the next witness. A hush fell over the room as Elijah Johnson, barely 10 years old, stepped forward. He was small, almost lost in the oversized witness chair, but his presence was magnetic. He met the judge's gaze with unnerving steadiness, then turned toward the defense. Reeves's smirk faltered slightly. Perhaps for the first time, he saw the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just a child taking the stand. This was the witness they had overlooked. This was the boy who had seen everything. The prosecutor stepped forward, her voice calm but charged with significance. "Elijah, can you identify the man who killed your father?" The world seemed to stop. Elijah inhaled deeply, the kind of breath one takes before plunging into deep, uncharted waters. His gaze moved past the judge, past the jury, and locked onto Reeves. The tension in the room became unbearable. The boy's hand rose, his finger extending toward the man who had shattered his world. His voice, clear and unwavering, sliced through the silence. "He killed my daddy." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Maya exhaled sharply, her lips pressed together to keep herself from breaking. Reeves, for the first time, paled. The room hung in the stunned silence, the weight of a child's truth bearing down on every soul present. A storm of emotions played across Reeves' face, shock, disbelief, then a flicker of something more dangerous. His jaw tightened, his fingers curled into fists. The walls were closing in. The defense attorney bolted to his feet, his voice a sharp crack against the silence. "Objection! This is emotional manipulation. A child's accusation cannot be taken as evidence." The prosecutor didn't flinch. "We will prove otherwise." The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, but nothing could erase the seismic shift in the courtroom. The balance of power had tilted. The boy had spoken, and now the world was about to hear the truth. The tension in the room thickened as Elijah exhaled, his small hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. His mind, sharp as ever, reached back not just to the night his father was murdered, but to the beginning of it all. And so, the story unraveled. The West Side neighborhood was changing, but not in the way its longtime residents had hoped. Once a thriving community where families had built lives across generations, it was now being swallowed whole by development firms, their glossy brochures promising revitalization, while bulldozers flattened history. Small businesses were closing one by one, their owners forced to sell for insultingly low prices or lose everything to new zoning laws and skyrocketing property taxes. The ones who resisted faced something far worse: visits from city officials, endless inspections, fines that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. It wasn't renewal, it was removal. David Johnson had watched it happen to his neighbors, one after another. The barber who had cut his hair since childhood suddenly found his shop shut down due to unsanitary conditions. The corner grocery that had provided fresh produce to the block for decades was hit with a surprise tax audit and forced into foreclosure. He knew the pattern, and now it was his turn. The Johnson family pharmacy had stood at the same corner for over 40 years, a legacy passed down from David's father. It wasn't just a business, it was a sanctuary, a place where neighbors knew they'd be treated with care, where prescriptions could be paid off in small installments if money was tight. David refused to sell, no matter how many offers landed on his desk, no matter how many warnings came his way. His wife, Maya, knew the risks. As a lawyer, she had spent years fighting for families being driven from their homes by corporate greed disguised as progress. She had seen firsthand how the system was rigged, how laws could be twisted to serve those who wrote them. But even she underestimated how far they would go. The first fine was for a mislabeled inventory shelf. Then came the surprise health inspection, where a fridge was declared 1 degree too warm. Next, the fire department showed up, claiming the store's emergency exit signs were not up to code, though they had passed inspection just months prior. It was calculated, systematic. They weren't just coming for the pharmacy, they were coming for David. Then the phone call started. No threats, just silence. Sometimes a single breath before the line went dead. Sometimes the same unknown number calling at 3 in the morning. One night, David sat on the edge of their bed staring at the floor. "They want me gone," he said simply. Maya reached for his hand, but he didn't move. "And if I don't leave, they'll find a way to take everything." Elijah, their 10-year-old son, listened from the hallway, unseen. He wasn't like other kids. His mind worked differently. He remembered things, every detail, every sound, every pattern. His parents called it a gift. Sometimes it felt like a curse. He had seen the stress in his father's eyes, the way his mother checked the locks twice before going to bed. He knew something was coming. Then late one night, it did. David got out of bed quietly, thinking Maya was asleep. She wasn't. "Where are you going?" she whispered, sitting up. "Just need some air," he said, but he was already putting on his jacket. "David, don't do this." Her voice was sharp, edged with fear. "I have to," he said, voice tight. "I need to know what I'm dealing with." Maya knew arguing wouldn't stop him, so she watched as he walked out the door, the tension in her chest tightening like a vice. Elijah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He could feel it, a heaviness in the air, a warning in his bones. He wasn't supposed to leave the house at night, but tonight he had to. Slipping out of bed, he moved silently, the way his father had taught him in their late-night spy games. He grabbed his jacket, stuffed his small recorder watch into his pocket, and slipped out the back door, following the sound of his father's footsteps down the street. David walked with purpose, head down, shoulders tense. He didn't know he was being followed, not by his son, and not by the shadows watching him from the alleys. Elijah stayed a safe distance back, his small frame blending into the night. He didn't know where his father was going, but he knew it wasn't good. Then he saw it. David crossed into an empty parking lot behind an abandoned supermarket. The lot was dimly lit, the flickering streetlights casting long, jagged shadows. 3 men were waiting for him. Elijah ducked behind a dumpster, heart pounding. Michael Reeves stood with his hands in his pockets. The casual arrogance of a man who knew he couldn't be touched. He had spent years as a decorated officer, but those who knew better understood what he really was, a man who enforced the law only when it served him. Beside him stood Thomas Harrison, a real estate mogul whose name had been plastered across half the city's new development projects. He was clean-cut, polished, but Elijah could see it, the cold calculation in his eyes. Third man was Frank Porter, a city councilman with a smile as slimy as his reputation. He was the one who made sure all the right paperwork got filed, that policies were rewritten to benefit those who paid him. David stopped a few feet away. "You've been making things difficult," Harrison said, adjusting his expensive cufflinks. David crossed his arms. "I'm not selling." Reeves sighed, shaking his head like a disappointed teacher. David, David, you're being stubborn. We've tried the polite way. Now we have to try something else." David clenched his jaw. "You can harass me all you want. I'm not going anywhere." Porter chuckled, stepping forward. "Oh, but you will. You see, we don't need you to sell. We just need you to be unavailable." Elijah held his breath. "I've already been through your so-called inspections," David said. "You have nothing," Harrison smiled. "Yet." Reeves stepped forward, his voice lowering. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to find something suspicious in your next inventory check. A few bottles you don't remember ordering. Some prescriptions that don't add up. It'll be a real shame when the DEA gets tipped off about an illegal operation happening right under your nose." David's fist clenched, but Reeves wasn't done. "And if that doesn't work, maybe you get caught up in a misunderstanding with the wrong officer. Maybe something escalates. Maybe one night you just don't make it home." A chill ran down Elijah's spine. David's voice was steel. "I won't let you do this." Reeves smiled, a predator sizing up prey. Oh, you won't have a choice. That's when it happened. Elijah shifted his weight slightly, his foot pressing against an empty bottle. It rolled. The sound was deafening. Reeves's head snapped toward the noise. What was that? Elijah didn't wait. Elijah ran, his heartbeat thundering in his ears, his small legs pushing as fast as they could. Behind him, the sound of Reeves cursing, the scuff of hurried footsteps, then silence. He didn't dare look back. He weaved through alleys, slipping through gaps only a child could fit through, his breath ragged, his chest burning. He had to get home, had to get back before they realized who he was. By the time he reached the house, his limbs felt like lead. He paused at the back door, forcing himself to breathe, to calm the tremor in his hands before slipping inside, moving silently through the darkened hallway. He had just made it to his room, his mind racing with what he had just witnessed, when he heard the front door unlock. David was home. David stepped through the front door, locking it behind him with a slow, deliberate motion. His hands trembled just slightly, so subtly that only someone who knew him well would notice. He exhaled, his breath shallow, his body tense beneath the weight of what he had just witnessed. The meeting, the threats, the certainty that his time was running out. His mind replayed every word, every movement, every glance exchanged between Reeves, Harrison, and Porter. They weren't bluffing. They had already decided his fate. The only question now was how soon they would act. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that felt too heavy, too unnatural. He knew Maya was awake, waiting. She always knew when something was wrong. As he stepped into the dimly lit living room, he saw her sitting on the couch, arms crossed, her gaze locked onto him the moment he entered. She wasn't reading, wasn't watching TV, just waiting. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. "You went out," she said, her voice steady but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. David nodded, slipping off his jacket, careful not to let her see the way his fingers clenched the fabric. "Needed some air." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me." He sighed, running a hand down his face. He was exhausted, but there was no point in pretending with her. Not now. He sat down across from her, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. "It's happening," he said finally. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. "How bad?" she asked, her voice quieter now, but no less intense. David hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud made it real. He met her gaze, his own filled with something unreadable: fear, anger, defiance, all tangled together. "They're done playing games," he said. "They want me gone. And if I don't go willingly, they'll make sure I don't have a choice." Maya inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around her arms. "Then we go to the press. We go to the DA. They own the system," David cut in, his voice low but firm. "You know that. The police, the city council, the courts, they've got them all. If I push back too hard, they'll come after more than just the pharmacy." Maya's breath hitched. Her grip on her arms loosened, as if she had just realized something even worse than what he had said. "They'll come after us." David didn't answer, but the silence said enough. For the first time in their marriage, she saw something in him she had never seen before: helplessness. Not because he was afraid, but because he had run out of moves. The man who had always found a way, who had always protected his family, who had always been in control, was now staring down an enemy too powerful to fight. A long silence stretched between them. Then Maya straightened her back. "We leave," she said, her voice suddenly resolute. "We take Elijah and go. Tonight." David shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "They'd find us, and running means they win." Maya's throat tightened. She had spent years battling corruption in the courtroom, believing in justice even when it seemed impossible. But this wasn't about the law. This was about survival. "So what do we do?" she demanded, her voice cracking. David looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then finally he reached across the table, took her hand, and squeezed it gently. His grip was steady now, firm. "I'll handle it," he said. Maya stared at him, searching his face, looking for some hint of a plan. "How?" He exhaled, forcing himself to smile, as if it were just another problem to solve, just another fire to put out. "Trust me." She wanted to fight him on it, to demand answers, to refuse to let him carry this alone. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the truth. He had already decided. He had already accepted the risk. She swallowed hard. I don't want to lose you. David brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. You won't, he promised. But in his heart, he knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. As dawn approached, the weight of the previous night lingered in David's chest like a storm waiting to break. He had barely slept, his mind replaying every word, every threat from the meeting in the parking lot. He knew they would come for him, he just didn't know when. But when the morning sun rose and the pharmacy opened as usual, a small part of him dared to hope. Maybe today wouldn't be the day. Maybe he still had time. But hope was a fragile thing, and it shattered the moment the front door burst open. The bell above the pharmacy door chimed a familiar sound, one David Johnson had heard 1,000 times before. But this time, it was different. The air shifted, thick with something unseen but undeniable. Instinctively, he looked up from the prescription he was filling, and in that instant, he knew. They had come for him. The door burst open before the bell had even stopped ringing. Uniformed officers flooded into the pharmacy, boots thudding against the tile floor. Their movements were sharp, rehearsed. This wasn't an inspection. This was an ambush. Customers gasped, backing away as officers spread out like a pack of wolves, cornering their prey. David's heart slammed against his ribs, but he forced himself to stay calm. He stepped forward, raising his hand slightly, a gesture of controlled defiance. What is this? He demanded, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. Michael Reeves stepped through the doorway last, moving with the slow, deliberate arrogance of a man who already knew how this would end. He wore his badge-like armor, his uniform pristine, his eyes gleaming with something dark, something triumphant. He pulled a folded document from his pocket and held it up for show. Search warrant, Reeves announced, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We have reason to believe this establishment is involved in the illegal distribution of controlled substances. The words sent a chill down David's spine. He knew what was happening. He had known it was coming, but knowing didn't make it any less horrifying. You're lying, David said, his voice low, controlled. You know damn well this is a legitimate business. Reeves smirked. Then you won't mind us taking a look. He nodded, and in an instant, the officers moved. Drawers yanked open, shelves pulled apart, inventory scattered across the counter. Customers were hurried out the door, a few staying just long enough to watch in the stunned silence. David clenched his fists, every instinct screaming at him to stop them. But what could he do? They had the power here. They had already written the ending to this story. He turned to Reeves, forcing himself to meet the man's gaze. You don't even care how obvious this is, do you? David asked. Reeves chuckled, shaking his head. Obvious doesn't matter. Only proof does. A crash echoed from the back room, one of the officers knocking over a stack of medicine bottles. David flinched. His whole life, everything his father had built, was being ripped apart right in front of him. Then it happened. Got something? The voice came from one of the officers near the storage shelves. All movement in the room stopped. The officer held up a small, unlabeled pill bottle. A silence, thick and suffocating, filled the space. David's stomach dropped. The officer twisted the cap off, shaking out a few white pills. He held them up for all to see. What is this, Johnson? Reeves asked, mock curiosity laced in his voice. Unregistered medication? No records? That's a felony. That's not mine, David said instantly, stepping forward. Someone put that there. Reeves sighed, shaking his head like a disappointed teacher. Come on, David. You're a smart man. Smart enough to know this isn't looking good for you. Another shout came from the other side of the room. There's more! David turned, watching in horror, as another officer pulled out an envelope thick, filled with cash from a drawer near the register. The pharmacy had never seen that kind of money. David had never handled cash in that way. Every transaction, every sale was accounted for. But here it was, planted. Reeves let out a slow whistle. Now that's interesting. David's pulse roared in his ears. He turned, looking around the room, searching for someone, anyone who could see what was happening. But the officers weren't interested in the truth. They never had been. Reeves took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough for only David to hear. "You should have taken the deal." David's body went rigid. This wasn't a mistake. It was never about an investigation. It was punishment. An officer grabbed David's arm, yanking it behind his back. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into his skin. "You can't do this," he snapped, trying to jerk free, but another officer shoved him forward. "Oh, I can," Reeves said smoothly. He turned to the others. "David Johnson, you are under arrest for possession and distribution of illegal pharmaceuticals." The words cut through him like a blade. David struggled, not in desperation, but in rage. "You set me up," he growled, his voice raw with fury. Reeves leaned in, just close enough that only David could hear. "Of course I did." David's chest heaved. The walls of his pharmacy, the place he had spent his entire life protecting, blurred around him. Elijah crouched low beneath the pharmacy window, his small frame pressed tightly against the cold brick wall. His breath came in shallow gasps, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the strap of his watch. His father had given it to him on his last birthday, a sleek, black timepiece that was more than just a watch. It was a recorder, and tonight it might be the only thing that could prove the truth. Through the narrow gap in the window, he saw everything. The pharmacy, once a place of warmth and healing, was now a war zone. The shelves were overturned, bottles shattered across the floor like fallen soldiers in a silent battle. The air was thick with tension, and in the middle of it all stood David Johnson, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his face a mask of defiance. Michael Reeves stood opposite him, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His expression was calm, too calm. Elijah had seen that look before, the way a predator watched its prey right before the kill. Around them, officers moved methodically, not in chaos, but with purpose. This wasn't an investigation. It was an execution. David's voice was steady, but Elijah could hear the tightly contained fury beneath it. "You have no right to be here," he said. "This is a setup, and you know it." Reeves smirked, taking a slow step forward. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long, David. We gave you every opportunity to walk away. You should have taken it." David straightened his spine, lifting his chin. "I'm calling my lawyer." He reached toward the counter where his phone lay, his movements slow and deliberate. He knew better than to make any sudden moves around a cop like Reeves, but it didn't matter. Reeves's expression didn't change, but his voice did. It rose, sharp, commanding, filled with artificial urgency. "Gun!" he shouted. For a fraction of a second, everything stood still. Then the world exploded. Two shots rang out, deafening, slicing through the air like a blade. Elijah flinched, pressing his hands over his mouth to stifle the scream rising in his throat. His father staggered backward. David's face was frozen in shock, his mouth slightly open, as if he was about to speak. But no words came, only the sound of his body hitting the floor, hard, his head striking the tile with a sickening thud. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then the blood came. It spread slowly at first, then faster, seeping into the cracks of the floor, staining the pristine white of his pharmacist's coat a deep, horrifying red. Elijah's breath caught in his chest, his body locked in place. His mind screamed at him to move, to do something, but he couldn't. He could only watch. Reeves exhaled, shaking his head as if mildly inconvenienced. He holstered his gun, then crouched beside David's body. Elijah's stomach twisted as he watched Reeves reach into his own ankle holster and pull out a second gun, a smaller one, black, unmarked. With the ease of a man who had done this before, Reeves placed the gun next to David's outstretched hand. Elijah felt like he was going to be sick. Reeves pressed a hand to his radio. His voice was calm, detached, like he was reporting a routine traffic stop. 1970, suspect reached for a weapon. Officer had to use deadly force. Scene secure. Lies. Every word a carefully constructed lie. Elijah's fingers dug into the dirt beneath the window ledge, his nails scraping against the concrete. His heart pounded so violently he thought it might give him away. He forced himself to breathe, to stay still. If they saw him, if they knew he was there, he would be next. Inside the pharmacy, the officers moved quickly. One of them kicked over a few more bottles, creating a scene of disorder. Another nudged the fake gun closer to David's fingers with the toe of his boot. They were making it look real. Elijah's grip on his watch tightened. The red recording light blinked steadily. He had captured everything the moment Reeves shouted, the way his father had been unarmed, the planted evidence. The truth was there, locked inside this tiny device strapped to his wrist. He just had to survive long enough to use it. His body felt like it was made of lead, every muscle locked in place as he watched them work. The world around him blurred, but every sound was sharp, every movement burned into his memory. David wasn't moving. That thought hit Elijah harder than the gunshots. His father, the man who had taught him how to ride a bike, who made pancakes on Saturday mornings, who kissed him on the forehead every night before bed, wasn't moving. Tears burned at the back of Elijah's eyes, but he couldn't let them fall. Not here, not now. A car engine rumbled outside. The wail of sirens grew louder. More officers were arriving. Soon the scene would be locked down, the crime tape put up, the narrative set in stone. Elijah had to go. He swallowed hard, forcing his shaking limbs to move. Slowly, inch by inch, he backed away from the window. His heartbeat roared in his ears, drowning out every other sound. He reached the alley, his feet light against the pavement. One wrong step, one noise, and it would be over. He took one last look through the window. Reeves was talking to another officer, his back turned. Maya was nowhere in sight. Had someone called her yet? Had she heard? Elijah's fingers clenched into fists. The flashing red and blue lights painted the night in eerie streaks, reflecting off the shattered glass of the pharmacy window. The scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. Officers moved like clockwork, their actions precise, rehearsed, controlling the scene, controlling the narrative. Elijah ran. He didn't know how his legs carried him, didn't know how his breath kept up with the burning in his chest. But he ran. He had to. By the time he reached home, his lungs felt like they were on fire, his body trembling from more than just exhaustion. He pushed through the front door, his mind a blur of panic and rage. Maya turned at the sound, her eyes widening the moment she saw his face. "Elijah," she breathed, stepping forward. "What?" "It was a setup," he gasped. "They killed him, and now they're going to lie about it." Even as the words left his mouth, the television flickered to life behind her, and the lie had already begun. Fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. The morning after the shooting, the city awoke to headlines that rewrote the truth. Neighborhood pharmacist shot dead in drug raid. Authorities confirm suspect had a weapon. Police chief defends officers. It was a justified action. The news spread like wildfire, each outlet running the same narrative, carefully constructed, perfectly aligned. There were no questions, no doubts. Just a single, controlled version of events, the version that protected the system, that painted David Johnson not as a victim, but as a criminal who had been caught in the act. Elijah sat on the living room floor, staring at the television screen. His hands gripped the edge of his chair so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Maya stood behind him, her arms crossed, her entire body rigid as the newscaster delivered the story with detached professionalism. A routine narcotics investigation turned deadly last night when local pharmacist David Johnson was fatally shot by law enforcement. Officials state that Johnson was under investigation for illegal distribution of controlled substances, and when officers attempted to execute a search warrant, the suspect reached for a firearm. Officer Michael Reeves, fearing for his safety, was forced to open fire. No officers were injured in the exchange. A video played carefully edited body cam footage, cutting in right as David was reaching for his phone. The screen froze just before the gunshots, before his body hit the ground. A voiceover filled the silence. Police confirmed that Johnson was in possession of an unregistered firearm, believed to have been used in the illegal drug trade. Authorities also discovered large sums of cash on the premises. Maya inhaled sharply. Elijah could feel the rage radiating from her, the way her breathing grew heavier, her fingers twitching at her sides as if she was restraining herself from throwing something at the screen. "They're lying," Elijah whispered, barely recognizing his own voice. Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. The news continued, shifting seamlessly from crime scene footage to a press conference where Police Chief Williams stood at a podium, his uniform crisp, his expression solemn. Behind him, Reeves stood among a line of officers, his posture perfect, his face blank, no remorse, no guilt, just control. This was a tragic but necessary action, Chief Williams declared. Our officers put their lives on the line every day to keep this city safe. Last night, they encountered a suspect who refused to cooperate, who made the choice to escalate the situation. This is never the outcome we want, but Officer Reeves followed protocol. The body cam footage speaks for itself. Elijah's stomach twisted as reporters fired off questions, all of them useless. Chief, was there prior evidence linking Johnson to drug trafficking? We are actively investigating all angles, but we wouldn't have been there if we didn't have reason to be. Can you confirm if Johnson fired a weapon? We can confirm a weapon was found at the scene. No mention of how it got there. No mention of the recording Elijah still had strapped to his wrist. Maya grabbed the remote and shut the TV off. The room plunged into silence, but Elijah's mind was still screaming. He had seen the truth. He had recorded it. But the world wasn't interested in the truth. It had already chosen a side. Outside, the city moved on, its people consuming the headlines without question. Social media flooded with posts about the dangerous pharmacist who had been taken down. Some questioned the story, but they were drowned out by those who accepted the official version without hesitation. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Another criminal off the streets. Good job, officers. Funny how people are suddenly saints after they get caught breaking the law. Elijah's fist clenched so hard his nails dug into his palms. Mom, he said finally, his voice unsteady but determined, we have to do something. Maya didn't answer right away. She turned, walking toward the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to glance outside. 2 black SUVs were parked across the street, their tinted windows concealing the figures inside. Watching, waiting. They control the police, she murmured. The courts, the press. Her voice was barely above a whisper. If we go to them with the truth, they'll bury it, and us along with it. Elijah swallowed hard. So what do we do? Maya turned to face him, her eyes filled with something he had never seen in them before. Not just anger, not just grief, but something deeper. A wariness, a realization that they were fighting an enemy far bigger than they had ever imagined. We don't give them the truth, she said. Not yet. Elijah frowned. But if we don't, she cut him off. Right now, they control the story. If we fight back too soon, they'll twist everything we say. She took a slow, steady breath. We need proof, not just a recording. We need something they can't ignore, something they can't spin. Elijah's mind raced. He thought about the night before, about everything his father had told him. Remember everything. His fingers brushed against the strap of his watch, the device still holding the last moments of his father's life. The truth, locked inside a tiny piece of metal and wire. But would it be enough? Maya crouched down in front of him, gripping his shoulders. You're the only one who saw what really happened, she said. They don't know that, which means, for now, you're safe. Elijah stared at her. For now? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the truth. David was dead, but the people who had killed him weren't finished yet. The city moved on, but Maya and Elijah could feel the shift beneath their feet. It started with the silence calls that went unanswered, conversations that ended when they walked into a room. Then came the whispers, the sideways glances, the polite but deliberate distance. People didn't want to pick a side, but silence was a choice. And soon Maya and Elijah realized they weren't just mourning David. They were being erased alongside him. The silence was worse than the whispers. At first, it was subtle the way the neighbors averted their eyes when Maya walked down the street, the way conversations died the moment she entered a room. People who once greeted her with warmth, who had shared coffee over morning walks, now suddenly found reasons to cross the street when they saw her coming. The same people who had trusted David with their prescriptions, who had praised his generosity, now acted as if his name was something dirty, something dangerous. The divide in the community was clear. Some believed the official story. They repeated the headlines, regurgitated the police statements, convinced themselves that David had to be guilty. That the man they had known for years, the man who had delivered medicine to their sick parents, had been secretly running a criminal operation behind their backs. Others weren't so sure. They saw the inconsistencies, the way the media coverage felt too neat, too rehearsed. But suspicion was dangerous, and doubt didn't pay the bills. So they stayed silent. Elijah felt it worst at school. The stares, the hushed conversations that stopped just as he walked by. He could hear his name in the murmurs, the accusations hiding beneath forced smiles. My dad says his father was a drug dealer. The police wouldn't have shot him if he was innocent. I heard they found thousands of dollars in cash at his store. At lunch, his usual table was empty. Kids who had once played basketball with him now avoided him like a disease. Even his teachers treated him differently, more distant, more careful, as if he was a ticking bomb, a scandal waiting to happen. He tried to pretend it didn't matter. But when he reached into his locker one afternoon and found the words "like father," "like son" scrawled in black marker across the inside, something in him cracked. Maya wasn't faring any better. The law firm where she worked hadn't fired her, not officially, but cases were quietly reassigned. Meetings were suddenly rescheduled or canceled altogether. Her emails went unanswered. The partners weren't subtle about it. They didn't need to be. The message was clear. She was a liability. No one wanted to be associated with the widow of a suspected drug dealer. She fought back the way she always had, with facts, with the law. She filed motions, demanded access to unedited footage, sent formal complaints about the police department's handling of the case. Every request was met with delays, denials, roadblocks. The system was working exactly as it was designed to. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, slid under their front door rather than mailed. The paper was thick, the wording precise, cold. Notice of mortgage rate adjustment. The bank won. They had never missed a payment to had suddenly reassessed their loan. The new interest rate was more than double what it had been before, a figure designed not just to inconvenience them, but to crush them. Maya read the letter twice, then again, willing the words to change. They hadn't just killed David, they were coming for everything he had built. She stormed into the bank the next morning, Elijah in tow. The branch manager, a man in an expensive suit with a rehearsed smile, welcomed her into his office with the kind of politeness that barely concealed condescension. "I'm afraid this is just an unfortunate result of market fluctuations," he said, tapping his pen against the desk. "Interest rates have been rising." "Not like this," Maya snapped. She slid the letter across the desk. "This isn't a fluctuation. This is targeted." The manager sighed as if she was being unreasonable. "Ms. Johnson, I understand this is a difficult time for your family, but these adjustments are standard practice." "No, they're not," she cut in. "I've seen the records. I checked with my neighbors. No one else has had their rate adjusted, just me." She leaned forward. "Tell me, does the bank have any special interests in properties in my neighborhood? Any investors interested in clearing out homes?" The manager stiffened. It was quick, barely noticeable, but Maya caught it. She had spent years in courtrooms. She knew a guilty man when she saw one. "I'll look into it," he said smoothly, but she could already hear the dismissal in his voice. Elijah sat quietly beside her, his hands clenched in his lap. He wasn't just listening, he was memorizing. The tone of the man's voice, papers on his desk, the way his fingers twitched when he lied. They left without answers, but Maya knew the truth now. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about erasure. They weren't just punishing her for fighting back. They were making sure she had no way to fight at all. Maya sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't taken a sip from in hours. The house was too quiet, too still. The kind of silence that didn't bring peace, only dread. The eviction notice sat on the counter, the ink bleeding into the paper where her fingers had gripped it too tightly. They were out of time. "We leave tomorrow," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Across the table, Elijah sat unmoving. "No," he said. Maya looked up. "Elijah, we don't have a choice." His hands clenched into fists. "Yes, we do." "Elijah?" "I remember everything," he said, his voice firm, his eyes unblinking. "I have proof." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Maya's stomach twisted. She had spent weeks trying to shield him, to protect what was left of their lives. But Elijah had never needed protection, not like this. Not from the truth. Slowly he pulled back his sleeve, revealing the watch on his wrist. Maya's breath caught. "Dad told me to remember," Elijah said. "So I did." He unfastened the strap, placed the watch on the table, and pressed play. The room filled with the past. David's voice steady but firm. Reeves' voice calm, calculated. Then the lie. "Gun!" The shots. The body hitting the ground. The sound of metal scraping against tile as Reeves planted the weapon. Suspect resisted. Had to fire. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her fist against her mouth to keep from sobbing. It was all there. Every moment. Every word. And then a second recording. The voices shifted. It was the night before. The bodega parking lot. Harrison's voice, smooth as oil. "The pharmacy is the last piece. We need it cleared by the end of the quarter." Reeves, irritated. "I've tried everything, fines, inspections, threats. He won't budge." Porter, laughing. "Then make him a criminal." Maya's hands trembled as she hit stop. The room felt smaller. The air, heavier. "Elijah," she whispered, "why didn't you tell me?" His jaw tightened. "Would you have believed me?" She exhaled shakily, pressing her fingers to her temples. This changed everything. Or at least it should have. The next morning, Maya didn't pack. She didn't load their car. Instead, she walked into the district attorney's office, gripping Elijah's watch so tightly in her palm that the edges bit into her skin. Sarah Andrews sat behind a polished oak desk, her expression unreadable. She was younger than Maya expected, with sharp features and the kind of eyes that had seen too much. Maya placed the watch on the desk and pressed play. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. When the recordings ended, the silence stretched between them. Andrews exhaled through her nose, leaned back in her chair, and laced her fingers together. Then she said the words Maya hadn't expected. "It's not enough." Maya blinked. "What?" Andrews sighed, rubbing her temple. "This is good, but good isn't enough. It's Reeves. It's Harrison. It's a direct order to frame David." "It's a conversation," Andrews interrupted. "A conversation between three men who never explicitly state a crime. There's no direct admission, no planted evidence. No, we're going to kill him tomorrow." She shook her head. "Do you know how easy it would be for a defense attorney to spin this? They'll say Reeves was venting. They'll say make him a criminal was a joke. They'll say your son misinterpreted everything." Maya's breath hitched. "They'll destroy him," Andrews said quietly. She met Maya's eyes, and for the first time, her expression softened. "You want my honest opinion? If you come forward with this now, they'll bury it. They'll attack Elijah's credibility, twist your motives, and by the time they're done, your husband's name will be even more tarnished than it already is." Maya felt her chest tighten. "So what?" she snapped. "We just stay quiet? Let them win?" Andrews studied her for a long moment. Then finally she said, "You don't have enough yet." Maya's stomach dropped. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out the hum of the office. "What?" Andrews sighed, rubbing her temple. "This proves Reeves was involved, but it doesn't prove a conspiracy. It doesn't link the mayor, the developers, the police chief, and it doesn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that your husband wasn't armed." Maya's voice sharpened. "He wasn't armed." Andrews didn't flinch. "I believe you, but belief isn't evidence." The words hit like a slap. Maya forced herself to breathe, to think. "You want more?" she said, voice low and dangerous. "Fine, I'll give you more." Andrews met her gaze, unreadable. "Be careful, Mrs. Johnson." Maya stood. "No," she said. "They should be careful." The post went live at midnight. Maya sat in the dim glow of the laptop screen, her hands trembling over the keyboard. The title was simple. "They killed my husband. This is the proof." The video attached 13 minutes and 26 seconds of raw, unfiltered truth contained no edits, no commentary, no explanations, just the sound of Reeves orchestrating an execution. Maya hit upload. Then she waited, and the world caught fire. By morning, it had been viewed over 2 million times. By noon, Justice for David trended across every platform. By evening, the protest began. The city streets pulsed with fury. Crowds flooded the sidewalks, marching in unison, their voices echoing between the high-rise buildings. The signs they carried were blunt, raw. Reeves is a murderer. Justice for David. No more cover-ups. At the heart of it, standing on the steps of City Hall, Maya faced a sea of reporters. She didn't need a microphone. The anger, the heartbreak in her voice carried through the air. "My husband was murdered," she said, "and they called it justice." A roar from the crowd. "They told me there wasn't enough evidence." Her hands curled into fists. "So I gave them more." Cameras flashed. News anchors whispered into microphones. Officials inside the building scrambled. "They will tell you this doesn't matter," she continued, "that it's complicated, that we should let them handle it." She let the words settle. Then, "I say no more." The crowd erupted. Behind the glass windows of City Hall, the mayor's staff watched with nervous eyes. They had ignored this for too long. Now it was out of their control. And then, as if the universe itself had chosen this moment to drive the truth home, a chant rose from the crowd. "Open the case! Open the case! Open the case!" The pressure was undeniable, and finally, under the weight of an entire city's rage, the system cracked. By midnight, the official announcement came. A trial would be held. Maya didn't smile. This wasn't victory. This was war. The trial was never meant to reach this point. The system had done everything to suppress it, silencing witnesses, burying evidence, twisting the narrative. They had underestimated the fire that grief could ignite. They had underestimated Maya, but most of all, they had underestimated Elijah. He had watched from the shadows as the world debated his father's worth. He had listened to the lies, seen the people who once called David a friend hesitate before saying his name. He had carried the weight of the truth alone, knowing that one day he would have to speak it. That day had come. As he stepped onto the witness stand, the air in the courtroom tightened. Every pair of eyes locked onto him. The boy who had seen everything was finally about to tell the world. The courthouse was suffocating under the weight of power. Rows of officers filled the right side of the gallery, their uniforms pristine, their expressions impassive, their presence a silent warning. Their badges gleamed under the artificial lights, a stark contrast to the dark undercurrent of intimidation they carried. The defense team sat smugly at their table, their suits crisp, their confidence unwavering. Reeves, in the center of it all, exuded the quiet arrogance of a man who had always walked free. On the left, the community sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces a mixture of rage, grief, and hope. Some clutched photographs of David Johnson. Others wore shirts emblazoned with his name. Outside, the echoes of thousands chanting for justice seeped through the thick walls, a reminder that this trial was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning. Maya sat rigid, her nails digging into her palms. She had fought tooth and nail to get here, to drag the truth into the light. But now at the final moment, she could do nothing but watch as her 10-year-old son stepped onto the stand. The courtroom fell silent. Elijah climbed into the witness seat, his small frame dwarfed by the wooden chair. His feet barely touched the ground, but his posture was unshaken. The judge watched him carefully, as if debating whether a child had any place in this war. Sarah Andrews approached, her voice steady. "Elijah, do you remember what happened the day your father died?" Elijah didn't blink. "Yes." His voice was clear, strong. The room shifted. The jury leaned forward. The defense attorney, Eleanor Bradford, uncrossed her legs, suddenly interested. Andrews nodded. "Tell us, in your own words, what you saw." Elijah took a deep breath. He didn't look at the lawyers. He didn't look at the judge. He looked directly at Reeves. "I was outside the pharmacy," he said, "hiding, watching." Reeves tensed. "I saw my dad standing with his hands up," Elijah continued, his voice unwavering. "I saw Officer Reeves tell him to step back. My dad asked to call his lawyer." The courtroom held its breath. Then Reeves yelled, "Gun!" Elijah's voice didn't rise, but the words cut through the air like a blade. "And he shot my dad." Gasps rippled through the crowd. On the left, someone stifled a sob. Maya squeezed her hands into fists, her whole body trembling. Andrews let the silence settle before speaking again. Elijah, she said carefully, is the person who shot your father in this courtroom today? For the first time, Elijah moved. His small hand rose, slow but unwavering, and he pointed, directly at Reeves. He killed my dad. The room exploded. Shouts erupted from the gallery. The judge's gavel slammed down, demanding order. Some of the officers stiffened, their hands twitching toward their belts. Reeves's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. He didn't speak. The moment stretched, unbreakable, and then so soft it was almost lost beneath the noise. Reeves whispered, "You should have stayed quiet, boy." Elijah heard him, but he wasn't afraid. He wasn't silent anymore. The prosecution table was still, the defense rigid, the jury frozen in anticipation. Every eye was locked on the small recording device in Sarah Andrews' hand. The moment she pressed play, everything would change. With slow, deliberate movements, she lifted the recorder toward the microphone. A single click echoed through the chamber. And then, if he won't sell, we'll make him a criminal. Reeves's voice, cold, calculated. A sentence spoken in the shadows, never meant to see the light of day. The weight of the words suffocated the room. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scrambled to take notes, some already dashing toward the exit to call their editors. A man in the jury box shifted uncomfortably. Even the judge, who had maintained an air of neutrality, tightened his grip on the gavel. Elijah didn't move. He had heard those words before. He had lived them. Maya closed her eyes just for a second, as if absorbing the weight of what she had fought so hard to bring into the open. The truth was no longer just theirs. It was out, irrefutable. And then lies! Reeves shot to his feet, his face twisted in fury. That recording is manipulated. This kid is lying. This whole damn thing is a setup. His voice, once so smug, now cracked under the pressure. It was a sound no one in that courtroom had ever heard before of fear. Andrews remained calm. "Officer Reeves, I remind you that outbursts will not be tolerated." Reeves slammed a fist against the defense table. "This is ridiculous. You're taking the word of a damn child over a decorated officer? Over me?" No one responded, because they all knew the answer. The defense team sat in stunned silence. Eleanor Bradford, the attorney who had once worn a smirk as she dismantled witnesses, now looked at her client like a man unraveling before her eyes. She had no objections, no strategic interruptions, no well-rehearsed argument, because she knew it too. The evidence was damning. The courtroom doors burst open as a handful of reporters rushed out, already dialing numbers, already writing headlines in their heads. Explosive new evidence in the David Johnson case. Corruption at the highest level? Officer Michael Reeves caught on tape. Reeves' breath came in sharp bursts. He turned to Maya, eyes burning with rage, then to Elijah Small, steady, unwavering. "You little bastard," he snarled under his breath. Elijah didn't flinch. The judge's gavel struck hard. "Officer Reeves, sit down or I will have you removed from this courtroom." But Reeves wasn't listening. His world was crumbling around him, and for the first time, he knew it. Elijah tilted his chin up, meeting the man's glare head on. "You lied," the boy said simply, "and now everyone knows." And for the first time since this nightmare began, Reeves had nothing left to say. The courtroom had already witnessed the impossible. A system built to protect its own had been forced to confront the truth. But justice wasn't just about uncovering lies. It wasn't just about proving what had happened. It was about what came next. The verdict was in. The evidence had spoken. Now it was time for judgment. The judge adjusted his glasses, his face impassive as he reviewed the final sentencing papers. The room was deathly still. The only sound was the faint scratching of reporters' pens against notepads, capturing history in real time. Elijah sat next to Maya, his small fingers gripping the armrest of his chair. He had waited for this moment, imagined it in 100 different ways. But now, as it was about to happen, he felt no satisfaction, only a quiet, heavy certainty that the world had finally caught up to what he had known all along. "Will the defendant please rise?" Michael Reeves stood, his once pristine uniform now replaced with a standard-issue suit. His shoulders were squared, his jaw locked in defiance, but his eyes betrayed him. For the first time, They weren't filled with arrogance. They weren't filled with control. They were filled with the creeping realization that this was the end. The judge cleared his throat. Michael Reeves, you have been found guilty of second-degree murder, conspiracy to falsify evidence, and obstruction of justice. You abused your position of power. You perverted the course of justice. You took an innocent man's life and tried to erase the truth. The judge paused, letting the words sink into the room like iron weights. This court finds no reason for leniency. You are hereby sentenced to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some people clapped, only to be silenced by the judge's gavel. On the left side of the courtroom, members of the community squeezed each other's hands, tears streaming down their faces. On the right, the wall of officers, once so confident, so untouchable, stood in stunned silence. Reeves didn't react at first. He simply stood there, frozen. Then slowly, his face twisted into something ugly, something violent. He turned first toward the judge, then toward the prosecution, then finally toward Elijah. "You think this is over?" His voice was low, shaking with barely restrained fury. "You think locking me away changes anything?" Elijah didn't flinch. He had stared this man down before. "It changes everything," he said. The bailiffs moved in. Reeves struggled, his curses lost beneath the growing noise of the courtroom. But it didn't matter anymore. He was done. As he was dragged away, the courtroom doors burst open, and the next wave of consequences came crashing down. Outside, news cameras flashed. Reporters shouted over one another, desperate to be the first to break the next revelation. Because it wasn't just Reeves. The corruption went deeper. Councilman Frank Porter arrested. Police Chief William Harris arrested. Developers from Westside Development indicted on federal racketeering charges. One by one, the dominoes fell. Maya watched as the officials who had signed off on David's murder were let out in handcuffs. These were men who had shaken hands in the shadows, who had made backroom deals over expensive cigars, who had looked at their community and seen only numbers on a ledger. Now they were nothing more than criminals in cheap suits, paraded in front of flashing cameras. Justice had been slow, but now it was relentless. The city erupted in protest. The people who had once been too afraid to speak now shouted from the rooftops. Their voices no longer whispers of fear, but roars of defiance. And then the final blow came. The development project, the grand plan that had set all of this into motion, was dead. Under public pressure, the city council was forced to suspend all plans for Westside's redevelopment. The land, once marked for demolition, was handed back to the community. The businesses that had been targeted were given restitution. And for the first time in years, the people who had fought so hard to stay knew that they had won. Elijah stood on the courthouse steps, looking out at the crowd. His father had fought for this. His father had died for this. And now, standing beside his mother, feeling the weight of history shifting beneath his feet, he knew that David Johnson's legacy would never be erased. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything, like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. The battle wasn't over. For Maya Johnson, the fight for justice didn't end with Reeves behind bars. It didn't end with corrupt officials taken down or the West Side redevelopment project collapsing under the weight of its own deceit. Justice was not a single moment, it was a war, fought day by day, case by case. She poured every ounce of her grief and fury into something bigger than revenge, a movement. With the same relentless determination that had carried her through her husband's murder trial, she founded the David Johnson Legal Center, a place where families like hers, families who had been trampled by the system, could fight back. The same building that had once housed David's pharmacy, the very place where he had been murdered, now stood as a beacon of justice. The shelves, once lined with medicine, now held case files and legal documents. The counter where David had greeted customers now served as a desk where Maya and her team worked late into the night, preparing lawsuits, exposing corruption, and giving a voice to those who had none. But it wasn't just Maya. Elijah, now older, had become something else entirely, not just a survivor, Not just a boy who had once pointed at a murderer in court. He had become a symbol. The kid with the perfect memory. The boy who had refused to let the truth be buried. His name became synonymous with resistance. His story inspired countless others to come forward, to speak out, to record everything. Cities beyond West Side began to take notice. Investigations launched. More corrupt officers, politicians, and developers found themselves under scrutiny. A single child's testimony had set off a ripple effect, and those in power were scrambling to stay ahead of it. But Elijah wasn't finished. The sun hung low over the cemetery, casting long shadows as he approached his father's grave. The world outside buzzed with the energy of change, but here, everything was still. He knelt, pulling the small golden pharmacist's pin from his pocket, the same one his father had worn every day, the same one David had given him to hold on to remember. With quiet reverence, he placed it atop the smooth granite headstone. "I remember everything, Dad." His voice was steady, but his fingers trembled as they traced the name carved into the stone. "And I kept my promise." His father had told him that truth had power, that remembering was a responsibility, that justice wasn't something given, it was something taken, something fought for, something earned. Elijah had fought, and he had won. The red light on his watch blinked steadily. Recording. It would always be recording, because the fight was never really over, and neither was the truth. If you believe justice must win, like and subscribe. Together we make sure the world never forgets.